Thank you all for coming to our transparency and responsiveness session. I really appreciate you being here because what I've understood is a lot of folks have gone to the other presentation because it's so cold in this room. This is the thick-blooded of us are here. But we have asked the facility to see if they can lower the AC to make it a little bit more temperate. But if anybody wants my jacket, you're more than welcome to it. This is a critical session, and we have a good audience that are participating online as well, so we know there are folks who are quite interested in this. When we talk, you've heard reference things about freedom of information. The Deputy Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition both referenced it as a key piece of legislation that has been talked about, hasn't yet manifested. This talks about not only the specific piece of legislation, but the underlying premise of the importance of information in driving change, policy, and reform. So as we go into this, this session is going to give us an opportunity to explore that and hear from different perspectives around how we think about information in its relationship to promoting governance, good governance. So what we know is that the Bahamas is undergoing a shift towards greater and more open information sharing. Transparency and making government data more available brings a few benefits. It has greater citizen involvement in governance. You get better monitoring of government activities, better tracking of public budget expenditures, both looking at impacts. You also have increased contributions by the public to planning or policy development and giving feedback to ministries on service quality, which, as we talked about in the last session, is going to be crucial for our reform agenda. We also know that transparency helps to drive innovation, and it brings new opportunities for governments to collaborate with citizens, both in the evaluation of the public services, but also in providing access to gain the innovation from businesses and entrepreneurs. That also allows us to be more competitive because we see that our businesses have more information as they prepare their business plans, or in the instance of applying to government contracting, have a better and more qualified response to a bid, so that when government is choosing this contractor or this business versus that, they're going to do so in a more effective and efficient way. And ultimately, that reduces the cost to government. So we can get more out of our investments. That reduces costs, that increases efficiency. So the question then becomes, how do we facilitate an environment here where we're moving more towards a model of information sharing? And we have three wonderful panelists to talk to us about it today. To start us off, I'll just introduce the panelists. We have Keith Thompson, retired Justice Keith Thompson, who is the newly appointed Information Commissioner at the government's Freedom of Information Act unit. We have Kieran Chase, who's a co-founder of IntelKey, which is one of the cutting-edge data gathering and management firms here in the Bahamas. And we have Rashina Ingram, who is the executive director for the Waterkeepers Bahamas organization, one of our civil society colleagues that's been working and fighting to drive conservation and environmental issues. We're really excited that she was able to join us from Grand Bahama, so thank you so much for coming. So to start us off and talk a little bit about what the government has done in this area and how we've moved forward on specifically freedom of information, I would like to welcome retired Justice Keith Thompson. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Aubrey. I'd like to thank the Organization for Responsible Governance for inviting me here to speak on behalf of the Freedom of Information Unit. And I've taken the approach that I ought to speak on the act itself. You know, governments are usually held suspect, especially in recent times by the press, et cetera, et cetera. And I would like to, in my presentation, assure the public, that's inclusive of everyone, that this particular act, the Freedom of Information Act of 2017, goes a very long way in supporting accountability, transparency, and the easy access to information Now, I'd like to say up front that just like the Freedom of Information Unit, we have taken a phased approach because the civil service is a very large organization. And the best approach would obviously be to phase in the ministries and/or agencies as we go along. The same approach has been taken with the Act. Not all of the Act is yet in force. However, I have no hesitation in saying that the government has given us their full support with a view to bringing the entire Act into force and to doing whatever is necessary for the full implementation of the Freedom of Information Act. So in keeping with the title, FOIA and information sharing, I'd like to say that in 2017, when the Act was finally passed, the Bahamas made history. The passing of this Act, the Freedom of Information Act, will certainly change the way that business is done in our country. Section 33 of the Act has a subtitle, Independence and Powers. And this is the first section that drives home the fact that the Freedom of Information Unit is to function independently. And it has been given, via the Act, certain powers by which to do that. In Section 33, it says that the Commissioner is not to be regarded as a public officer under the Public Service Act. The Commissioner shall have all powers, direct and incidental, as are necessary to undertake his functions, as provided for under this Act, and for the purpose, and for this purpose, may establish a Freedom of Information Unit. That is the Commissioner, not anyone else, but the Commissioner. The Commissioner shall enjoy independence and autonomy in operating and administering the Freedom of Information Unit. The Commissioner shall develop his own rules and procedures to regulate its affairs through a process of consultation. And this last point in this section, subsection 5, in the exercise of his powers, the Commissioner shall be responsible to Parliament, not the Minister, to Parliament. So from the very beginning, I think we can start to see this thrust of independence being enshrined in the Act. Now, on May 6th, Shane Miller, my deputy and a former employee of the Office of the Attorney General, was appointed. I was appointed on May 3rd. Since then, we have staffed the office with some of the immediate staffing needs, and we have also engaged a consultant through the IDB who has been doing an awesome job in guiding us through this process with a view to full implementation. As this is a mammoth task, as I would have said earlier, and I also said that we were taking the phased-in approach, we have agreed and decided to start with 10 pilot agencies. The reason we chose these agencies is because we feel that these are the agencies that the public at large would seek to get information from. Those agencies are the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Public Service and National Insurance, the Department of Public Procurement, Bahamas Power and Light, the Department of Immigration, the Treasury Department, and the Bahamas Investment Authority, and the Ministry of Works. The objects of the Act are government accountability, transparency, and public participation in national decision-making. That would be one of the reasons why a citizen would wish to request information so that they are more educated on certain things, and then they are free then to make suggestions to their representatives or whomever may be in a position of authority. This then can be summarized as the principle of maximum disclosure. And a part of my approach as commissioner is to be proactive with the disclosure. In other words, information that can easily be disclosed and that is not subject to any exemptions or special situations, we disclose it. There's no reason why, if the information could be disclosed, that it ought not to be disclosed. In this regard, the Freedom of Information Unit has created a vision and a mission statement. The vision statement is as follows: to promote and establish a culture of transparency in government and enforce the public's right to information, subject, of course, to any applicable laws. The mission statement is to enforce the Freedom of Information Act and instill transparency and accountability as tenets of the Bahamian governance, subject to any applicable laws. Sometimes, when we get to this point and an application is made, it may be that the information being requested is not in the ministry to which the request has been made. And so the Act makes a provision for a transfer of that request to the relevant agency that may have the information. That is contained in Section 8. And by the way, the Freedom of Information Act you can find online at Bahamas Laws Online. There will be times when the document or other form of information may have or contain confidential or sensitive information. In that case, Section 12 of the Act provides, and it has a subheading of partial access. And this section says, where an application is made to a public authority for access to a record which contains exempt material, the authority shall grant access to a copy of the record with the exempt material deleted therefrom. And so that particular issue, you will see when I get to that point, will be directly connected to the technology that will be required. A public authority which grants access to a copy of a record in accordance with this section shall inform the applicant that the copy contained exempt material which has been deleted, and B, inform the applicant of the statutory provision by which by virtue of which the deleted material is deemed to be exempt material. And so the Act quite methodically seeks to maintain calm, if you will, as opposed to you receiving something that you requested and you see something that is redacted and you say, oh, they're hiding something. Well, the Act says that you must inform the applicant that the document contained either confidential or sensitive information. Now, when requests are made, there may be times when that request is denied. When that happens, there is an internal review process which is enshrined in the Act. So it doesn't just stop where it's just denied and you go about your business. There is a process set out in the Act in Section 28. And if and when that internal review process is exhausted, it doesn't end there. Section 39 makes provision for the applicant to make an appeal to the commissioner. The commissioner will then hear the appeal and is obligated under the Act to provide a written decision. This, again, I spoke about making history. This now will be the beginning of the creation of jurisprudence in the area of freedom of information in this jurisdiction. In other words, the creation of real cases that can be relied upon if the denial happens again. It doesn't stop there. If you're not satisfied with the decision of the commissioner, the Act makes provisions for you to appeal to the Supreme Court. And so there are a series of checks and balances. And this is what we mean when we speak of accountability and transparency. Because you now have provisions that will exhaust every avenue that you may feel you are being blocked, right up to the Supreme Court. Now, in order for all of this to take place, within these ministries and/or agencies, there's a creation of something else. There's the creation of a new career path in the civil service. That new career path is that of an information manager and a records keeping manager, which is in line with what you would have heard in the first panel, where we talk about digitization, et cetera, and the proper keeping of records, data, etc. Because the Act requires the commissioner, the unit, to generate a report at the end of each year, which is to be presented to Parliament. In order to do that, the technology has to be in place. And so the information managers must be trained. And as I speak, we are working on looking at individuals who we will engage to come in and start training persons who have been identified as possible information managers. Interestingly enough, in the earlier panel, they were speaking about persons who are qualified. And I always joke, sometimes when people get job, they stop looking for work. People are given jobs and they then stop looking for work. We have to be careful because record keeping is a very important aspect of freedom of information, digitization, and data. The data must be properly kept. Otherwise, it's counterproductive to even have it if it's not well kept, properly kept, and easily accessible. And so the information managers will have to be trained. Their support staff will have to be trained. And so this is a creation of a whole new unit in every ministry and or agency. What we have done with the first 10 pilot agencies is we sent out a readiness assessment form so that we can make an assessment as to where these 10 pilot agencies are in terms of technology, record keeping, how they keep their data, how is it accessed, etc. And so that's really critical. And the technology is going to require a system. Again, the panel that was earlier, that we heard earlier, they spoke about My Gateway, etc., etc. Well, the freedom of information regime is no different. In order for a member of the public to make a request, they can do it physically, but if we are moving into the digital age, then the majority of requests are going to be done online. And so the system itself, again, it has to be user-friendly, but it has to be simple enough for John Q. Public to go online and request information from a ministry or agency. And that also is being looked at as I speak to you, because it's going to be critical and time is of the essence. Yeah. Under the Act, there are also offenses. And I'm going to end here because I know we're short of time. And Section 54 says a person who commits an offense, if in relation to a record to which a right of access is conferred under this act, where he alters or defaces, blocks or erases, destroys or conceals the record with the intention of preventing its disclosure, is guilty of a criminal offense and can be subject to a fine and or imprisonment. And so I'd like to leave you with this. The Freedom of Information Act is not government against the public. It's not the public against the government. It's not to cause scandal to any political leader. And it's not only for the media, it's for everyone. And I saw some school children here this morning, and I was very happy because even though we may look at this as just getting information, students have projects to do. And they may need information to complete their projects. So this will help them to do their projects and get the correct information. With that, I will take my seat. Thank you very much.
We've had occasion in the last couple of weeks to hear the commissioner speak, and every time he speaks, I learn something new. And I'm now really excited about the vision and the mission statement and the concept, I think, which is also important for us to think about that he spoke to, which is that sense of making more information available as it becomes. So moving to proactive availability of information versus reactive, which is really the modern standard. So that's exciting to hear. And I think online somebody was interested in applying to be an information manager, so we could have already started to see a new recruitment process. Our next presenter, you may not know of him, but you do know of the work that he does. In the instance of our last election, there was a lot of information gathered about the public and their thoughts and their ideas, and a lot of that came through the work of our next presenter, Kieran Chase, and his partner at IntelKey, which is an incredibly powerful Bahamian-developed company that's doing a lot to really understand how do citizens feel about it, about what's going on, and then how to prevent that and present that in a way that's accurate and valid. So, Kieran, could I ask you to come on up?
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for that warm introduction and, of course, the opportunity to speak to you guys today. So before I get into anything, what I was taught to do is establish the goal of what you're speaking about first. So right now, today, my goal is to inspire you to put a flashlight on the world around us through data. And, just in terms of the background of that goal, I see it as, synonymous with myself, my career path, and all the experiences that got me here in terms of establishing IntelKey as a market research company and data collecting agency, along with my partner, Questwell Ferguson. It also frames the definition of what I call light and dark. So in terms of background, I actually got my bachelor's degree from the University of Arkansas in retail management, worked for a year in Little Rock as an operations analyst, came home into corporate Bahamas, again took up a financial analyst role, got a business analyst role, franchise business leader. So pretty much my specialty is in fast-moving consumer goods. And that's where I honed a lot of the skills, had a lot of mentors that poured into me in terms of the importance of data when it comes to decision-making as a whole, not just in politics, but actually in everyday life. And here comes the relationship between dark and light. So first thing I want to describe to you is complete darkness. So fast forward to, again, me being a franchise business leader, very important role, make very critical decisions every day that not only impact the business from a financial standpoint, but also impact people. Sign off on a lot of things. I know a lot of managers can relate, but the feeling never went away of not having the adequate information that I needed to make that decision comfortably. Of course, you have quantitative data. You can go through financial reports all day. You can talk to customers as they walk in and out of locations. You can reach out to friends, family that also have expertise in particular fields for advice, but you don't have qualitative research. And if you don't have that, that's a crucial missing component, because while you've talked to all these people individually and done what you can within your small reach, you don't have what we call feedback from the masses of the people. And in terms of fast-moving consumer goods industry, politics, etc., you're actually of service to the people. So if you don't have en masse what their feedback is, what they want, what they need, what their desires are, you may be right sometimes, by guessing, formal education, etc., but you don't have that direct feedback to be exactly sure. Now, due to those various promotions that I explained, tenure went very well, but it always felt as if, for example, all the lights were shut off. Someone told me to make my way out of the door, and off of memory, I felt my way through, but I wasn't exactly sure that my pathway was correct each and every time. So, of course, mistakes were made, you stumble, you fall, and again, always in the back of your mind, you have this missing piece or missing factor in terms of, do I have everything I need to move forward and be justified in my decision making? So in order to understand what darkness is, of course, there had to be some exposure to light. I actually had the opportunity to do my OPT at a Fortune 500 company called Wesco Distribution, and there, everything was literally data-driven. Didn't get any assignments for about 3 months. I was literally in a data dojo. I had to understand Tableau, Excel, how data is collected, what the analysis process looks like. They would give you, pop quizzes and tests where they give you messy data and they tell you to make sense of it. Basically, here's what the report should look like. Here's how messy it is. We'll give you an hour to fix it. That's what I was exposed to, straight out of college. Even in the application process, you have resources like Glassdoor and Indeed, where you can see all of these jobs all over the country. The salary information is all there. And it's the same in the Bahamas, right? We know what everyone gets paid and what you should be entitled to for your roles. Or is that where the darkness comes into play? I think so. So being exposed to that, having all of those experiences, it being entrenched and ingrained in me that you don't make decisions by gut. You take the data that you have and the insights you have. Of course, you depend on your experience and your training, but you bring those together to make decisions to service the people. It's not about you at the end of the day. Like I said, every signature, every approval, every disapproval has repercussions, short-term, long-term, etc. Now comes the progression towards light. So go to another company in corporate Bahamas facing a similar situation. We even have more quantitative data. My assumption was, this company is racking up so much money. Of course, we're investing as we should in research and development, conducting surveys, focus groups, etc. Sorely disappointed, again, had to make those decisions based on past experience and not necessarily with the people who were probably willing to scream and shout to us, but there was that divider or that gap, if you will. My co-founder also works at this company, and we began to vent, have these discussions about, wow, I just had to approve this, but I don't really know if this is gonna work because I don't know if the customers are gonna accept this, how they feel about it, from a grassroots standpoint, etc. Are we really making the right decision? We'll have to wait, 3 months until we have the data points and pivot as necessary. That was unacceptable for me and unacceptable for him. And that was the inspiration in terms of establishing Intel Key. Our goal is to close the information gap that we know exists between Bahamians and Bahamian organizations at large. The more we close that gap, the better decisions we make, the happier we are on both spectrums in terms of the comfortability and confidence in decision making, and then on the opposite end, the satisfaction through service of the people, that they actually feel heard, seen, felt, and at the end of the day, they get what they want and what they deserve. So the goal is to facilitate that. In closing, and I'll try to wrap this all up, we're not where we need to be, of absolute certainty when it comes to data collection, data mining, data organization, transparency, the list goes on and on. We're definitely a long ways away, but we have had some green shoots, and I can share my personal experience in terms of when I finally accepted that, maybe we are on the right track. We had to invest a lot of our personal finances into just conducting the research and sustaining the company and keeping the projects going, most of which were pro bono. But it wasn't the fact that we had over 20,000 responses in our first 6 months through political surveys. At that point, we just had the blinders on. We were trying to make it happen, get results. It wasn't the fact that we had onboarded over 50 employees in New Providence and Grand Bahama that were now all going out door to door in respective constituencies, conducting surveys with Intel Key uniforms, iPads, and the like. Just focus on results, trying to make it happen. What really struck a chord with me is, on a Friday night, my wife was making dinner. She asked me to go out and go around to the store to get some wine from the bar. So go over to the bar, waiting in line to check out for her Moscato. She loves sweet wine. But while I was waiting in line, the cashier was talking to the guy in front of me, and he had on, a shirt affiliated with a political party. So the cashier says to him, boy, you know they ain't gonna win, right? You know they ain't gonna win. That's what the data's saying. And my ears perked up. So you say, what you mean they ain't gonna win, man? This is my party, it's our turn, you know, all of the banter that goes along with, you know, the heavy political debates. So he said, no, let me show you the article from Intel Key in a newspaper. I just read it this morning. It says such and such is leading by 10%. They gonna win the election. So I checked out, sat in the car for 5, 10, 15 minutes. I don't know how long, but at that point it finally resonated that we were making an impact. Because at the end of the day, the goal is not to sell data to a CEO, a board of directors. That is not the only people that can take advantage of data and make use of it and should be interacting with data. From day one, our goal was to take everything complex, make it simplistic. If it's a political survey, you have a red bar, you have a green bar, you have a yellow bar. You show very clean percentages and a short line of what it means and how you got there. And that should be the simplistic approach. Don't overdo it, because at the end of the day, it's to have interaction with the masses of the people. This was by no means, you know, the CEO, you know, of one of the leading companies in the Bahamas, you know, a stock trader, a banker, what have you. We know those are data people. This was a cashier in a bar on a Friday evening saying that she just looked at some data as if it was, you know, CNN, Bloomberg, and the like, saying, no, you need to look at this, actually look at what's being reported. And at that point, that's when I saw the light. So we will continue in that fashion, in that mission of bringing darkness to the light. This is not just about Intel Key. This is about the Bahamas as a whole. We are severely behind when it comes to the way we collect, organize, and of course share data and interact with data. And that's all I have for you guys today. For any inquiries, visit intelkey.com or send an email to info@intelkey.com. Thank you so much.
You see why I had him on the panel, right? I think that that also signifies one thing when we talk about good governance and what needs to happen in order to get us there. So talking about the fact that we need to train ourselves to be thinking more critically. We need to get ourselves in that space of, you know, there's so much information that comes through our device. What if it is good? What if it is bad? And then not only hold our elected and appointed public servants accountable to use data to drive it, but also be conversant to understand how they made that decision and make that information valuable. So I think that's a crucial point. I think it's also another evidence that we have the resources, the talent, and the experience here. We don't necessarily need to look elsewhere. There's a lot of information, a lot of power, a lot of experience, a lot of clearly talent that we can apply and is being utilized here. And with the right intent, it will help to move us forward. So thank you very much, Kieran. I'm extremely excited to have our next speaker. We learn a lot from our civil society colleagues, and in some ways, what we also see is that civil society hasn't yet been given the level of credibility, I think, in our country that for the type of work that it does, for what it brings to the table, and often you'll see international NGOs that will come in, and they have a certain level of expertise. But the goal ultimately is to start and grow what we have here and build that strength. And so what we have here is Rashima Ingram, who is the Executive Director of Waterkeepers Bahama, and she can talk a little bit about, from the civil society perspective, why getting valuable information and right, accurate information is vital to ensuring the protection of some of the most important things about the Bahamas. Rashima?
Good afternoon, everyone who is present today, either on virtual or in person. And so in here did get a little bit warm, so I think I'll be fine. Just to give you a little bit of background on myself, I am Grand Bahamian. However, I want to Also put in a plug for the College of the Bahamas, which is now the University of the Bahamas, of which I'm a graduate. So I was really happy to see that we had some blue coats. Their coats look much better than when I was in student government. So even that shows the progression of even our tertiary institutions moving from college to university. And our previous speaker during the opening session, the leader of the opposition, said that we are moving, but we are not moving fast enough. And so I am happy that the Commissioner, Justice Thompson, did speak about the Freedom of Information Act, and that's where I want to also present to you on. Because, as Matt has mentioned, civil society organizations are a vital stakeholder in our economy and in our business and in the way that we are progressing. And the presence of civil society also shows that we have a robust structure in terms of governance. And as soon as we are able to accept that and to add more presence of civil society, we will see our governance structures are more for the people who are on the ground. And so with that, advocacy is healthy for a nation. Sometimes you need a little bit of back and forth to kind of iron out the kinks. But in 2012 was the introduction of the Freedom of Information Act. Whether or not we will move to enact it completely. And so when it was presented as a bill, many civil society organizations, of which Waterkeepers Bahamas stands on the shoulder of, like Save the Bays, Org Bahamas, Citizens for a Better Bahamas, Transparency International, all pushed for this act to really be implemented, because there is where they saw an opportunity to not so much engage in such a rowdy discussion with the government for the things that they were requesting. They saw the act as being a tool for them to be able to do the work that they need to do, as well as to ask government for particular documents or records in order for them to fulfill their mission or their mandate. However, in 2014, there was a demonstration in Rawson Square, because 2 years later, the people were waiting and asking for the act to be implemented. It was promised. It was, during the political season where a lot of these civil society organizations, even the people of the Bahamas, used the political season to put their requests on records. And we need to move away from that. And so today, I'll get to it. Today, we're happy that the act is in place, but just showing you how the road was paved. And in 2016, I'm sure most of you could remember the mighty march to Bay Street, where many Bahamians from different organizations walked the streets in black, because what was at the center of that was the implementation of the Freedom of Information Act, whether it was for us as environmentalists requesting information, for human rights advocates asking for equality, or whether it was for just the average Bahamian saying, who spent the government money, and wanting answers on that. In 2017, though, we saw progress where the bill became the act. But that celebration was short-lived, because parts of the act were not implemented. The parts where we thought as civil society gave us the most weight. And so we waited again for the full implementation of that act, and we're still waiting, but at least we're again making progress with that. 2021, though, almost 10 years later, we finally had the appointment of the commissioner and the deputy commissioner. And so now I understand, and now we could understand why the leader of the opposition said we are moving, but we're not moving fast enough. And so we're happy that we have now in place the people and the resources to now see the act being fully implemented. And I must applaud the previous administration as well as this administration for now taking that on to see it happen. But what has been happening between that time were civil society organizations, NGOs, requesting simple information to be shared with the public. And in requesting that simple information, it became expensive or burdensome for these organizations to be able to say, we want to provide the public with this information. We want to be able to say to the Bahamian people, who are the citizens, who are a great stakeholder in this nation, that here's what's happening. You're wondering why there is a marina being built, so we're going to access that information for you and on your behalf, because we are the advocates for clean water. And in order to do that, we're going to go to the government and we're going to ask for this information and then provide it to you. As easy as that sounds, that resulted in many actions being started in the courts, because it was very difficult to get information out of the proper agencies, out of the proper ministries, to get a simple question answered. And so while the commissioner has said that there is a time period in which requests are going to be made known, I also hope that this will not be another delayed process, because even though we have 30 days for a matter to be answered, there's also the appeals process, right? Because there can be denials. And so we don't want the denials to go on for another 30 days, where 60 days or 90 days later is where we have no further remedy or resolution, where we have to now put in to the courts to commence another civil or legal matter. So that's one of the things I'm hoping that the Freedom of Information Unit, because the commissioner did say that the commissioner has the power, and with the commissioner having the power, I'm hoping that the commissioner also empowers the people, where they are no longer going through a long process of either legal matters or going through a long process of it's on the minister's desk or on the desk of the director. Because we are making these applications to the respective ministries or departments. And there were 10 departments that were rolled out in this initial phase of the implementation. And one of the things that I would really love to see is, even though there's a 30-day period for the request to be respected so much, because we're trying to move those barriers away, where we could do it in 10 days. Why wait till day 29? Do it in 10 days because you want to see that robust involvement or participation by the people of the Bahamas as well as the government agencies. And as we are moving away from corruption, because corruption was brought up in the opening session, I want for all of us to remember that corruption goes beyond money, or who stole the money, or who got that government job and why, right? Because when we think corruption, that's all we're thinking. But corruption also means guarding or keeping secrecy information that's of public interest that the public should be made aware of. And so as we are implementing the Freedom of Information Act in its entirety, we're also moving away from what we are not telling the people. Let's be transparent so that there aren't any rowdy discussions in Rawson Square, because it's it's a matter of simple interests. So for instance, I'll give you an example that recently happened where there are articles in the paper talking about the IDB giving a loan for blue economies. If a request is made from either civil society or whomever, we're only asking for that information to see which parts of that loan or which parts of that project we can be a part of. Because a lot of the work that we are doing can complement those projects. So it's not always us as NGOs or CSOs wanting to take matters to court. It's us wanting to work with the government and say that, so we have been doing this water monitoring process, or we have been doing this educational component, or we have been doing this type of work that we didn't even realize was research, and now we can contribute to your project. But then also, how is that money being spent and how is it being trickled down? So yes, you may have given a certain portion to this organization or that organization, but how much of it did you give? And why aren't we able to know how much of it was given and what are the targets? So these are simple requests that are being made that could be shared where we could all collaborate and all help with building that governance structure. Again, the Bahamian people need to be educated. That's one of the things that we have been saying. And so while I focus on grassroots and focus on civil society, I was also happy to hear about how the commissioner talked about the information managers, and happy to see C.R. Walker and the University of the Bahamas here, because the Ministry of Education needs to be a part of all of these discussions. The Ministry of Education, the University of the Bahamas, Bahamas Technical and Vocational Institute needs to be a part of this, because as Justice Thompson and Mr. Shane Miller are building this unit, they need to be able to build this unit along with these stakeholders as well. So we're not waiting another 9 years to say, oh, we now need to find professionals to fill these holes in order for this unit to function properly. We want to see that this unit is functioning as a full system where, although we're implementing parts of it, we're also implementing parts of it for the future, where we know in the next 3 to 5 years we will need these persons who will be in place. So one of the things that this session really focused on was the responsiveness and transparency. And in between the time of 2012 to now, I want to just mention the fact that the media and civil society really had to find ways to become best friends, because that's really how the information was being shared, where the media called a particular group and said, what do you think about this? What are you doing about this? Or the NGOs or the CSOs reach out to the media, because that was really the only way to get the public aware of what was happening. Get the public aware of the fact that this is some dredging that's happening. Did you know about that? How do we push this out there so that the Bahamian people are aware of what's happening in their own backyards? And the fact that we are archipelago, where we have works happening in Long Island and in Abaco and Bimini, outside of New Providence, so much things are happening where the focus is not on those islands all the time. And so we have persons who may call our office and say, did you know this is happening here? And we are completely unaware. But Bahamians are also confused, because even though they're living in that backyard, they don't know what's happening. And so I'm really hoping that the commissioner talked about offenses and talked earlier about records being defaced or destroyed, and the offenses and penalties that are attached to those actions. So I'm hoping that those offenses or penalties are strictly enforced, because when requests are made for whether or not an environmental clearance was approved and when it was approved, as simple as when an environmental clearance was approved, it should be a matter of pulling it from the file, and you have IntelKey who can help you with database management to make it so much easier for you to access that information rather than going through files of paper and those triplicate copies. Remember, some ministries still using triplicate copies. And we're hoping not to use that as an excuse to say this is why the record can't be found. Right? So we're hoping that when the person from Long Island calls and says that, did you know that this such and such a thing happened, and we put our request in on day one, and we say to whichever ministry it is, for us it probably will be the Ministry of the Environment, whichever ministry it is, we're hoping to get that beyond, quicker than the 30 days. It could happen quicker than the 30 days. We're talking about a digitized system now, where in 2021, we have young persons on this panel who can get these things done much easily, because we don't want anything to be confrontational. We want to be able to provide information to the people and to do our jobs as best as we can and educate people and empower people at the same time. So civil society is growing. It's a robust stakeholder unit in the Bahamas, and I'm happy that we're able to stand here together and talk about these issues and share our concerns. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rashima. And I think it's so much was said within that, and we'll have a few minutes for some questions, some things that came online, if you have questions from the audience. But two things stand out to me that. One, which is just fundamentally, Waterkeepers Alliance, they're working towards clean water so that we can fish, we can swim, we can drink. What can be more fundamental, right? This is a function that's going to benefit us all, no matter where you live or how you live. The Bahamas depends upon its water. So we don't want to have obstacles to that. You want to embrace that there's a group that's dedicated and marshaling private resources and volunteers and working with our kids. So they need the resources to be able to be as effective as possible. And if they're able to do that and lump and work with the government in their projects, think about what can come out of it. So fundamentally, what comes out as we talk about it on each of these panels is that transparency brings opportunity. Opportunity to address some of our long-standing issues, opportunity for new industries, opportunity for us to raise the level in government, for us to work and push forward the issues of accountability and transparency like we've never done before. So I think it's a powerful concept. We're going to go ahead and take just a few questions, because I know we're all looking towards moving to lunch. But I want to ask just the panel in your instances. I'll read a couple of questions from online. There's some comments related to data. I think Kieran, your presentation was well received, but also provocative in some ways. So comments about the fact that data can be used manipulatively, right? And that also there's a level of maturity that needs to happen in order for us to really support that. But then there's also a question about, and this is a deeper bit, of what kind of qualitative methods did you use that was effective here in the Bahamas? So if you could touch on those for just a second.
Yep, sure. So beginning with the methods that we used, we went with the most cost-efficient one first, which would actually be online opt-in. And by that process, it's just creating a web link and distributing it for people to go ahead and participate if they so choose. Like the person is asking about, just in terms of the methodology that we had to implement to get better qualitative data, what we actually did was A/B test that opt-in result that we got versus one, phone survey administration, and then two, as I mentioned, door-to-door, which was actually the most effective. Just based on market research principles, online opt-in is inherently biased to a certain extent, because you're not pretty much, touching everybody that may not necessarily want to engage in that information sharing practice. Phone numbers, depending on the complexity of the software, etc., can also be one in terms of participation. Frankly, people are very uncomfortable when you call them on the phone and ask them to do a quick survey. And surprisingly, or at least to us, because we had no familiarity with it or no basis of what it would look like nationally, people were more welcome when they were actually approached. They see the uniform, someone looks professional, they're greeted, and then they understand that, this is not a political survey. This is literally, an amalgamation, if you will, of what everyone thinks, how they feel. You can go online, you can see that information processed almost in real time, and there's some trust and confidence there. So I think what was one of our Achilles' heels was, not having financial backing, support, just me and again my partner Questwell Ferguson, literally at the point to where when we got our paychecks, we paid our employees. That kind of forced us to be enclosed and encased and not have any allegiance or not have any pressure in terms of, manipulating or presenting the data to where, it speaks to this or speaks to that. It's literally just collecting the data based on research principles and then using all of the knowledge and skill you have to properly interpret it. And, at the end of the day, whatever that interpretation is, it is. We have to accept it. Of course, there will be debate, but from an Intel key perspective, there's no pressure to conform to a particular result or find a particular result in the numbers.
There was a note which I think is important to speak to, that as we talk about data and information management, sometimes it's presented as if it's a young person's game. But the reality is that there are folks of all ages and from all stretches that can be very effective, quite computer literate, and we should also make sure that we're promoting that, because that knowledge base doesn't have to be limited to just those that are below a certain age level. That it's valuable. But it does speak to the fact of how do we help people to better understand and use data responsibly, to sift through information that maybe isn't as important, isn't as relevant, or maybe presented in a more skewed way. Thoughts on that? You want to speak anything? And this could be for the.
Yeah.
I was hoping the data professional would speak to this, but one of the reasons why I did take the mic was the fact that with the rollout of the freedom of information and its powers that are given to the people, it really requires us to be accountable, because now you've been provided this information, you have to be responsible with the power that was given to you. And as you're receiving whatever information that you requested, it should be used for the purposes of the benefit to all Bahamians. And the way that you interpret that should look at whether or not this can be useful, whether or not you're doing it to provide opportunities, to provide avenues for people to access more information. And so if, for instance, if Waterkeepers Bahamas is requesting certain information, it's saying that we requested the environmental clearance, right? Or we requested documents related to insurances for any environmental activity that may have been happening. And the way that we interpret that now is to say whether or not the government acted in the best interest of the people by going through the proper process or the proper procedures. And everything should be done according to the law. This transparency is all about the rule of law. And the rule of law not only applies to ministers or government agencies, it applies to us as the citizens as well. And so interpretation of that should be for whether or not the government acted in the best interest of Bahamians. Bahamians are benefiting the most from whatever would have happened. And even investors are doing so with the best principles, whether it's international or national principles.
I just want to add or piggyback, so to speak, on something that Rashima would have said in her presentation. For those of you who may not know, I'm from a teaching background. I taught for about 20 years. And when I spoke about creating a new career path, what is included in that is that the University of the Bahamas may wish to consider including in their curriculum a records-keeping degree, an information management degree, because this is just the beginning, and it is something that will be needed. We need it now. We will have to do the best we can with what we have presently, but it does not prevent preparing, as we said, not only young people, but the university is there for everyone. And someone who is probably 50 or even 60 may say, something, I would like to go and take that course and get a diploma or a degree so that I could be of assistance to a ministry or an agency. And so this is opening the door for a whole lot of things. And you're quite right. Not only the University of the Bahamas, but you have BTVI, who can also be involved with the technical aspect of it. We have some high schools, e.g. Aquinas, that has so many different programs, auto mechanics, et cetera, they can be involved. So this is opening the door, as I said, for a new career path, and everyone should seek to take advantage of it.
Thank you. And there's some other questions. We'll pass those on and see if we can get information out. We do have to close this session because we've got other sessions coming beyond this. Commissioner, one question that did come up is how can folks get in touch with the Freedom of Information Unit if they have questions or things that they want to be responded to at this point?
All right. Well, now I'm not good with numbers. So I do not remember the telephone number, but I think you can find it in the phone book. If not, we're on Facebook, Instagram. We are located presently in a building that we call the Yandy Building, which is on University Drive, immediately south of the Shell gas station. Upstairs in the first section of that little complex. We'd be happy if you wanted to come and ask questions, find out what's going on, et cetera, et cetera. We'd be happy to oblige you as best we can.
For folks that are more conversant on that, in Twitter it would be FOIA Bahamas, at FOIA Bahamas. On Instagram, it's also at FOIA Bahamas, and in Facebook, it would be Freedom of Information Unit. I want to close really quickly with something that Kieran said, because I think it defines kind of what we need to look at doing this, and I think it tags into what Rashima is speaking to as well, which fundamentally is that we have to don't make decisions by gut. Use data to take decisions that will serve the people. This is the fundamental power that I think data has to have. We have to become more conversant with it as people. We have to teach our kids about what it means and how to figure out what information they're reading on this site makes sense or not. We have to make sure we gird ourselves so it's not used in a political agenda so that we can say, oh, this is qualified information. But we also have to work and set that this is the expectation that we then make our decisions by. It's not just personality, it's fact. And if we're able to do that, we'll be able to have a lot of power and resource within our own country that we can use to further ourselves. Thank you, folks, for participating. Everyone, for going through the cold. Panelists, thank you so very much. We look forward to everyone joining us for lunch. For those folks online, Zoom participants, thank you for all your instincts and your insights, rather, and your comments and questions. We will be presenting all this information ongoingly so folks can see this information, and please do reach out if you have further questions. Have a great morning. Thanks.